The distant howl of coyotes pierced the stillness of the Arizona night as Madeline Porter pressed her trembling hand against the rough bark of a juniper tree, her swollen belly a painful reminder of all she had lost and all she had to protect. Blood trickled down her arm from where the thorns had scratched her during her desperate flight, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. She had been running for 3 days. Ever since she'd discovered her husband's betrayal and fled from the violence that followed. It was 1874, and the Arizona Territory was as unforgiving as the men who sought to tame it. Madeline had come west with dreams of a better life, only to find herself abandoned, pregnant, and hunted. The moonlight cast long shadows across the desert landscape as she stumbled forward, her strength failing with each step. When her knees finally buckled beneath her, she didn't fight the fall. The hard ground welcomed her with cruel indifference, and for the first time since her escape, Madeline allowed herself to weep. The tears came silently at first, then in heaving sobs that shook her entire body. So consumed was she by her grief that she didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. Terror shot through her veins as she scrambled to hide, but her condition made her clumsy and slow. "Who's there?" a deep voice called out, followed by the metallic click of a revolver being cocked. Madeline froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had no weapon, no means to defend herself. If this was one of Vernon's men, she was as good as dead. A tall figure dismounted and approached cautiously, lantern held high. The light revealed a man with a weathered face, perhaps 30 years of age. Dressed in the practical garb of a cowhand dusty denim, worn leather boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his eyes in shadow. "Please," Madeline whispered, one hand instinctively shielding her belly. "Please don't hurt us." The man's expression shifted from wariness to concern as the lantern light illuminated her condition. He immediately holstered his gun and knelt beside her. "Madam, I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice gentler now. "Name's Yates Quinn. I've got a ranch about 2 miles east of here. What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" Madeline couldn't answer. The relief of finding someone who wasn't immediately threatening to kill her, combined with exhaustion and hunger, overwhelmed her completely. Fresh tears spilled down her dirt-streaked face as her body shook with silent sobs. Without hesitation, Yates set down his lantern and reached for her. His strong arms encircled her shoulders with surprising tenderness. "You're safe in my arms," he murmured against her hair. "I don't know what you're running from, but nothing's going to harm you tonight." Something in his voice, a quiet certainty perhaps, or the simple human kindness that had been so absent from her life, made Madeline believe him. She allowed herself to lean into his strength just for a moment. "I can't stay," she managed between sobs. "They'll be looking for me." "Who's looking for you?" Yates asked, but Madeline shook her head, unwilling to say more. "All right," he said after a moment. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but I can't leave you out here. It'll be below freezing by midnight, and there are mountain lions in these hills." As if to emphasize his point, a distant yowl echoed through the canyon. Madeline shuddered. "I have a cabin," Yates continued. "It's not much, but there's a bed and a fireplace. Food, too. You can rest there tonight, and tomorrow. Well, we'll figure tomorrow out when it comes." Madeline hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to keep running, to trust no one. But her baby kicked inside her, a reminder that her decisions no longer affected just her own life. "I won't hurt you," Yates said again, seeming to read her thoughts. "On my honor." After another moment's consideration, Madeline nodded. Yates helped her to her feet and guided her to his horse, a sturdy palomino that regarded her with curious eyes. "This is Sonny," Yates said, patting the horse's neck. "He's gentle as a lamb. Let me help you up." With careful hands, he lifted Madeline onto the saddle, then mounted behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a secure circle that felt like the first safe place she'd known in months. "Hold on," he instructed, and then they were moving through the night, the rhythm of the horse's gait oddly soothing. As they rode, Madeline's thoughts tumbled over each other like water over stones. She had fled from Silver Creek with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small bundle of necessities. Vernon had promised her a life of comfort when they'd married 2 years ago, sweeping her off her feet with grand tales of his business ventures. Only after they had settled in Arizona territory did she discover that his business involved cheating honest folk out of their savings through elaborate investment schemes. When she confronted him about it, his charming facade had cracked to reveal a cruel stranger. The bruises had barely faded before she discovered she was with child. For months, she'd endured his increasing volatility, hoping that fatherhood might soften him. Instead, when she was 6 months along, she overheard him planning to sell their unborn child to a wealthy couple back east who couldn't have children of their own. That night, she'd waited until Vernon passed out drunk, then fled into the darkness, taking only what she could carry. She'd been running ever since, sleeping in abandoned shacks and stealing food when she could. Now, as the steady motion of the horse lulled her into an exhausted daze, she wondered if she'd made another terrible mistake by trusting this stranger. But there was something about Yates Quinn that felt different. Perhaps it was the absence of that hungry look she'd grown accustomed to seeing in men's eyes, or the respectful distance he maintained despite their physical proximity. Whatever it was, for the first time in days, Madeline allowed herself to hope. The cabin appeared suddenly, a solid shadow against the starlit sky. It was small but sturdy-looking, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A dog's bark greeted their approach, followed by the appearance of a large, shaggy beast that bounded toward them. "That's just Rufus," Yates said as Madeline tensed. "He's all bark and no bite, I promise." True to his word, the dog's aggression melted into excited tail, wagging once he recognized his master. Yates dismounted first, then carefully helped Madeline down. Her legs nearly buckled as they touched solid ground, and he steadied her with a firm hand at her elbow. "Easy now," he murmured. "We're here. You're safe." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair placed before it. A narrow bed occupied the corner, covered with a handmade quilt. A table and 2 chairs stood near a small window, and shelves laden with provisions lined the opposite wall. Everything spoke of a solitary but orderly existence. Yates immediately set about building a fire, while Madeline stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure of her place in this man's private domain. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the rocking chair. "Rest. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" Madeline tried to remember. 2 days ago, I think. I found some berries yesterday." Yates frowned. "That won't do for a woman in your condition. Let me fix you something substantial." While he busied himself at the small stove, Madeline sank gratefully into the rocking chair. The gentle motion was soothing, and the growing warmth from the fire began to thaw her chilled bones. Despite her wariness, her eyelids grew heavy. She must have dozed off, for the next thing she knew, Yates was gently shaking her shoulder. "Food's ready," he said. The simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread was the most delicious thing Madeline had ever tasted. She tried to eat slowly, knowing her stomach might rebel after so long without proper nourishment. But hunger won out. Yates watched her with concern, but didn't comment on her obvious desperation. When she finished, he took her plate and placed it in a basin of water. "You should take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "You need proper rest, especially in your condition." Too exhausted to argue, Madeline allowed him to guide her to the bed. He even found her a clean nightshirt far too large, but soft, with age and washing. "It was my mother's," he explained when he handed it to her. "I keep a few of her things. You can change behind that screen." He indicated a wooden folding screen in the corner. When Madeline emerged, Yates had already made himself a pallet on the floor near the fireplace, his back pointedly turned to give her privacy. The simple courtesy nearly brought tears to her eyes again. She slipped beneath the quilt, the unfamiliar luxury of a real bed, almost overwhelming after nights spent on hard ground. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," she said softly. "Yates," he corrected. "And you're welcome, Mrs. Porter," she supplied after a moment's hesitation. "Madeline Porter. But I suppose I'm not really Mrs. anyone anymore." If Yates was curious about her statement, he didn't show it. "Get some sleep, Madeline. We'll talk more in the morning." As the fire crackled and the wind whispered around the eaves of the cabin, Madeline felt the tension slowly drain from her body. For the first time in months, she felt safe enough to truly rest. Her hand came to rest on her swollen belly, feeling the reassuring movement of the child within. "We'll be all right," she whispered to her unborn baby. "Somehow, we'll be all right." Across the room, Yates Quinn listened to her breathing deepen into sleep. He stared at the dancing flames, wondering what troubles had driven this woman to flee alone into the wilderness in her condition. He'd seen fear in his time, had worn it himself during the war, but the terror in Madeline Porter's eyes spoke of horrors he couldn't begin to fathom. Whatever demons pursued her, he decided, they would have to come through him first. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Madeline woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, until memory returned. She sat up carefully, one hand supporting her belly, and looked around the cabin. Yates was already awake, his pallet rolled and stowed. He stood at the stove, his back to her as he prepared what smelled like coffee and bacon. The domesticity of the scene made her heart ache for a life she'd never had. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. Yates turned, and Madeline was struck by how different he looked in daylight. His features were strong but kind, with laugh lines around his eyes despite the serious set of his mouth. His hair was a rich brown streaked with gold, and his eyes were the deep blue of a summer sky. "Sleep well?" he asked, pouring a cup of coffee. "Better than I have in months," she admitted, accepting the steaming mug with gratitude. "Thank you again for your kindness." Yates nodded and returned to his cooking. "Hungry?" "Starving," Madeline confessed with a small smile. Over breakfast, Yates carefully broached the subject of her circumstances. "I don't mean to pry," he began, "but if you're in some kind of trouble, I might be able to help." Madeline stared into her coffee cup, weighing her options. This man had shown her nothing but kindness, but Vernon had seemed kind once too. "My husband," she finally said, "is not a good man. When I discovered the extent of his activities, I confronted him. He didn't take it well." She unconsciously touched her cheek where a fading bruise still lingered. Yates's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "When I learned I was with child, I hoped things might change. Instead, they got worse. He planned to sell our baby." Her voice broke on the last words. "Sell your child?" Yates repeated, disbelief evident in his tone. Madeline nodded, unable to look at him. "To a wealthy couple back east. I overheard him arranging it. He'd already accepted payment." She took a shuddering breath. "I couldn't let that happen, so I ran. And he's looking for you." It wasn't a question, but Madeline answered anyway. "Yes, he has men who work for him, dangerous men. I've been trying to reach California. I have a cousin there who might help us." Yates considered this information, his expression thoughtful. "California's a long way, especially in your condition. When's the baby due?" "About 2 months, the doctor said." Madeline placed a protective hand on her belly. "That's why I need to keep moving. I can't be found before then." "You can't travel like this," Yates said firmly. "You need rest, proper food. The stress alone could bring on an early birth." "I don't have a choice," Madeline insisted. "If Vernon finds me—" "He won't," Yates interrupted. "Not here. My ranch is remote, and few people know of its existence. You could stay, at least until after the baby comes." Madeline stared at him, astonished by the offer. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Yates met her gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted." Something in his tone made Madeline believe him. Still, caution made her ask, "What would you expect in return?" Understanding dawned in Yates's eyes, followed quickly by something like anger not directed at her, she realized, but at whoever had taught her to expect the worst from men's kindness. "Nothing," he said firmly. "Absolutely nothing you don't freely choose to give. I have a small ranch to run. I manage on my own, but an extra pair of hands would be welcome if you're feeling up to it. If not, you can rest and prepare for your child." It sounded too good to be true. "I don't understand," Madeline admitted. "Why help me?" Yates was quiet for a long moment. "During the war," he finally said, "I saw too many people turn away from others in need. I swore I'd never be one of them. Besides," he added with the ghost of a smile, "my mother would haunt me from her grave if I turned away a woman in your condition." Madeline searched his face for any sign of deception, but found only sincerity. Still, caution had kept her alive this long. "I should keep moving," she said reluctantly. "The longer I stay in one place, the more likely Vernon will find me." "At least stay a few days," Yates urged. "Regain your strength. If you still want to leave after that, I'll help you get to California safely." The offer was tempting, more than tempting. Madeline's body ached from days of travel, and the thought of continuing her journey in her condition filled her with dread. Moreover, there was something about Yates Quinn that made her want to trust him, despite all she'd learned about the unreliability of men. 3 days, she finally agreed. "I'll stay 3 days." Yates nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good. Now, if you're feeling up to it, I'd like to show you around the place." The ranch, as Yates had called it, turned out to be a modest operation compared to some Madeline had seen, but impressive for a man working alone. Beyond the cabin lay a small barn, a corral with 6 horses, a chicken coop, and a fenced garden plot. Further out, cattle grazed on the scrubby vegetation of the high desert. "It's not much," Yates said as they walked slowly around the property, mindful of Madeline's condition. "Just 30 head of cattle and the horses, but it's mine, free and clear." "It's wonderful," Madeline said sincerely. After the garish opulence of Vernon's house in Silver Creek, with its stolen luxuries and false pretenses, the honest simplicity of Yates's homestead was refreshing. As they approached the corral, a sleek chestnut mare trotted over to investigate. "That's Penny," Yates said. "Gentlest horse I've ever known, good with nervous riders." The mare nuzzled Madeline's outstretched hand, and despite everything, she found herself smiling. "She's beautiful. She's yours to ride if you want. After the baby comes, of course." The casual way he spoke of a future beyond her immediate crisis made Madeline's heart constrict. How long had it been since she'd thought beyond mere survival? Back at the cabin, Yates showed her where everything was kept: food stores, linens, medical supplies. "I need to check the herd today," he explained. "Will you be all right here alone?" Madeline nodded. "Of course. I could prepare dinner while you're gone." "You don't have to." "I want to," she interrupted. "Please, let me do something useful." After a moment's consideration, Yates nodded. "All right, I should be back by sunset. Rufus will stay with you. He'll bark if anyone approaches." With that, he saddled Sonny and rode out, the dog settling on the porch as if understanding his duties. Madeline watched until horse and rider disappeared over a distant ridge, then turned back to the cabin with a strange sense of both relief and loss. Alone for the first time in a safe place, Madeline took the opportunity to truly wash herself. Yates had left a large copper tub near the fire, and she heated water to fill it. The simple luxury of a bath nearly brought her to tears again. She washed her hair, scrubbed the travel grime from her skin, and put on the clean dress Yates had given her, another of his mother's, altered hastily that morning to accommodate her condition. Afterward, feeling human again, she explored the cabin more thoroughly. There were few personal items, a daguerreotype of a woman with Yates's eyes, presumably his mother, a Bible with dates of births and deaths inscribed inside, a single shelf of well-worn books. It was the home of a solitary man, but not an unhappy one, she decided. In the kitchen area, she found ingredients for a proper meal. Cooking had always calmed her, even during the worst days of her marriage, and she lost herself in the familiar rhythms of preparation. By the time the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, she had a stew simmering on the stove and biscuits ready to bake. She was setting the table when Rufus's bark alerted her to Yates's return. Watching through the window, she saw him dismount and lead Sonny to the barn. The easy grace of his movements caught her attention, so different from Vernon's affected swagger or the threatening postures of his men. There was a quiet confidence to Yates that required no demonstration. When he entered the cabin, the scent of stew filled the air. He stopped short, surprise evident on his face. "You've been busy," he said, removing his hat. "I hope you don't mind," Madeline replied, suddenly uncertain. "I found the venison in your cold storage." "Mind? I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this since—" He trailed off, a shadow crossing his features. "It smells wonderful." They ate together at the small table, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. Yates praised the meal with genuine appreciation, and Madeline found herself flushing with pleasure at the simple compliment. "Tell me about your ranch," she said as they ate. "How long have you been here?" 5 years, Yates replied. "Bought it from an old-timer who was heading back east. It was little more than a shack and a few acres then. I've added to it bit by bit." "All alone?" He nodded. "I hire help during roundup, but mostly it's just me. And Rufus," he added with a small smile. "What brought you to Arizona territory?" Madeline asked, curious about this solitary man who'd shown her such kindness. Yates was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "After the war, I couldn't settle back into normal life in Tennessee. Too many memories, too many ghosts." He met her gaze. "I needed open spaces and clean air, a place where no one knew me or what I'd done." The pain in his eyes was familiar to Madeline, not the specific wounds, perhaps, but the haunted look of someone carrying burdens invisible to others. Without thinking, she reached across the table and touched his hand. "I understand," she said softly. His fingers curled around hers briefly before he withdrew, clearing his throat. "What about you? Before your husband, I mean." Madeline smiled faintly. "I grew up in Boston. My father was a school teacher, my mother a seamstress. They died of influenza when I was 19. I had no brothers or sisters, no close relatives nearby. I was working as a shop girl when Vernon came to town." She stared into the middle distance, remembering. He was so charming, so worldly. He talked about the West like it was paradise on earth. When he asked me to marry him after just 2 weeks, it seemed romantic rather than reckless. "You couldn't have known what he was," Yates said gently. "Perhaps not, but I should have been more cautious." Madeline sighed. "By the time we reached Arizona, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake, but I had nowhere to go, no money of my own. And then—" "The baby," Yates finished for her. Madeline nodded, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "I couldn't let him take my child. I just couldn't." "You did the right thing," Yates said firmly, "and you're not alone anymore." The words hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to examine too closely. After a moment, Yates stood and began clearing the dishes. "I'll wash up," he said. "You should rest." Later, as twilight deepened into night, they sat before the fire. Yates in his chair, Madeline in the rocker. He had found an old fiddle and played softly simple tunes that seemed to echo the vast loneliness of the landscape while somehow making it less lonely. Watching his strong hands coax music from the instrument, Madeline felt something shift inside her. Not the baby this time, but something deeper, more fundamental. A wall beginning to crumble, perhaps. A heart remembering how to hope. The 3 days Madeline had agreed to stay stretched into a week, then 2. The baby grew more active, his kicks, for Madeline was certain it was a boy, visible even through her clothing. Yates watched these movements with fascination when he thought she wasn't looking. Each day brought them closer in small ways. Madeline learned the rhythm of ranch life, helping with what tasks she could despite her condition. She gathered eggs, tended the garden, and kept the cabin in order. Yates, in turn, began to soften around her, his taciturn nature giving way to occasional stories and even rare laughter. They developed routines that felt dangerously like a shared life. Breakfast together before Yates rode out to check the herd. Dinner in the evening with tales of their respective days. Sometimes reading aloud from one of Yates's books, their voices taking turns in the lamplight. It was during one such evening, as June gave way to July and the summer heat settled over the land like a blanket, that Madeline realized she no longer thought of leaving. The idea of California had receded, replaced by the immediate reality of this small ranch and the man who owned it. The realization frightened her. She had trusted before, and that trust had nearly destroyed her. Yet Yates had never given her reason to doubt him. In fact, he had been unfailingly respectful, maintaining a careful distance even as their days twined together. "You're quiet tonight," Yates observed, looking up from the book he was reading, a collection of poetry that had surprised Madeline when she first discovered it among his possessions. "Just thinking," she replied, her hands busy with the baby gown she was sewing from one of Yates's old shirts. "About your husband?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Madeline shook her head. "About the future. The baby will be here soon." Yates nodded, his expression thoughtful. Have you decided what you'll do? After, I mean. The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Madeline set down her sewing, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. I don't know, she admitted. I should continue to California, I suppose, but, Yates prompted when she didn't continue. Madeline took a deep breath. But I've felt safe here, safer than I've felt in years. Something flickered in Yates's eyes, hope, perhaps, or relief. You can stay, he said quietly, as long as you need. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, he interrupted. Having you here, it's been good, Madeline. The place feels different. Better. The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with things unsaid. Finally, Yates stood, placing his book on the table. It's late, he said. We should get some rest. Madeline nodded, gathering her sewing. As she rose from the rocking chair, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, so sudden and intense that she gasped and clutched her belly. Yates was at her side instantly. What is it? What's wrong? I don't know, Madeline managed through clenched teeth. It felt like... She broke off as another pain gripped her, this one lasting longer. Understanding dawned in Yates's eyes. The baby? It's too early, Madeline whispered, fear evident in her voice. Almost a month too early. First babies often come early, Yates said, guiding her to the bed with gentle hands. My mother was a midwife. I helped her sometimes. This information, offered so casually, stunned Madeline momentarily out of her fear. You've delivered babies? A few, Yates admitted. Enough to know that this is normal. Let me help you get comfortable, and then I'll fetch some things we'll need. His calm confidence steadied her, and Madeline allowed him to help her onto the bed. As he moved around the cabin, gathering clean linens and heating water, she was struck by how naturally he assumed this role of caretaker. The labor progressed more quickly than either of them anticipated. By midnight, Madeline's pains were coming regularly, her face flushed with exertion. Yates stayed by her side, his hand strong and steady when she needed something to grip during contractions. You're doing wonderfully, he assured her, as she panted through a particularly intense wave of pain. The baby's coming, just as it should. Tell me something, Madeline gasped when the contraction eased. Anything. Distract me. Yates thought for a moment. When I was a boy in Tennessee, my father built me a treehouse in an old oak behind our home. It was nothing fancy, just a platform with a rail and a little roof. But to me, it was a castle, a ship, a fortress. I spent whole summers up there, reading or just watching the world go by. The image of a young Yates dreaming in his treehouse brought a smile to Madeline's face despite her pain. What happened to it? The treehouse? A shadow crossed Yates's features. It burned, along with our home, during the war. Union soldiers... He trailed off, then shook his head. That's not a story for now. Before Madeline could respond, another contraction seized her, more powerful than any before. She cried out, her body arching with the force of it. The baby's coming, Yates said, moving to check her progress. I can see the head. When the next pain comes, I need you to push. The next hour passed in a blur of pain and effort for Madeline. Yates remained steady throughout, his voice a calm anchor in the storm of her labor. And then, with a final push and a cry that seemed torn from her very soul, the baby slipped into the world and into Yates's waiting hands. A girl, he announced, his voice thick with emotion. You have a daughter, Madeline. The tiny, indignant wail that followed was the most beautiful sound Madeline had ever heard. Tears streamed down her face as Yates placed the swaddled infant in her arms. She's perfect, Madeline whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the miniature features that seemed both familiar and utterly new. Perfect. Yates watched them, something unreadable in his expression. What will you name her? Madeline considered the tiny life in her arms, this daughter born not into wealth or security, but into freedom and possibility. Hope, she decided. Her name is Hope. The days following Hope's birth passed in a haze of exhaustion and wonder for Madeline. Yates proved himself an unexpected ally in caring for the newborn, fashioning a cradle from a drawer and helping with middle-of-the-night feedings when Madeline was too tired to rise, watching him with hope, the tenderness with which he held her, the soft nonsense he murmured when he thought Madeline wasn't listening, awakened feelings she had believed long buried. There was something profoundly moving about this strong, solitary man, so gentle with her child. A week after the birth, as Madeline sat on the porch nursing Hope in the cool of the evening, Yates joined her with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and settled into the chair beside her, his gaze on the distant mountains. "I rode into town today," he said after a comfortable silence. "Thought we needed a few things for the baby." Madeline looked up, surprised. The nearest town was a full day's ride. "You didn't tell me you were going." "Didn't want you to worry," he replied. "But there's something you should know. There are posters up with your name and description." Madeline's heart stuttered in her chest. "Vernon," she whispered, instinctively drawing Hope closer. Yates nodded. "The posters say you're a disturbed woman who ran away with his unborn child, that you're a danger to yourself and the baby." His jaw tightened. "There's a reward for information leading to your return." Fear, cold and familiar, slithered through Madeline's veins. "He won't stop looking," she said, her voice hollow. "Not ever." "No one in town knows you're here," Yates assured her, "and I didn't give any indication I'd seen you, but I can't stay," Madeline finished for him. The thought brought an unexpected pang of loss. "I've already remained too long. I've put you at risk." "That's not what I was going to say," Yates said firmly. "This is your home now, if you want it to be. You and Hope both." The simple declaration left Madeline speechless. "Yates, you don't understand. Vernon is dangerous. If he found out you were harboring me—" "Let him come," Yates interrupted, a steely edge to his voice that Madeline had never heard before. "I fought in a war, Madeline. I've faced worse than a coward who would sell his own child." Hope finished nursing, and Madeline adjusted her clothing before shifting the baby to her shoulder. The familiar weight was a comfort as she considered Yates's words. "I can't ask you to risk yourself for us," she said finally. "You're not asking. I'm offering." Yates leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "These past weeks, having you here has changed things, changed me. I didn't realize how lonely I was until you came." The naked honesty in his voice made Madeline's chest tight with emotion. "I've felt it too," she admitted softly. "But I'm still married, Yates." "In the eyes of the law, Hope is Vernon's daughter." "The law," Yates said with quiet conviction, "isn't always right. What that man did to you, what he planned to do to Hope, no paper signed by a judge makes that acceptable." Hope made a small sound against Madeline's shoulder, and she automatically began to rock, a gentle swaying motion that soothed the infant. "What are you suggesting?" Yates ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Madeline had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I'm not suggesting anything improper," he said carefully, "just that you and Hope stay here, where you're safe, as my guests, until we figure out a more permanent solution." There was more. He wasn't saying Madeline could see it in his eyes, but whatever his unspoken thoughts, he wouldn't press her. That consideration, that respect for her boundaries, meant more than she could express. "All right," she said finally. "We'll stay. For now." The relief that crossed Yates's features was immediate and profound. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." As July gave way to August, and August to September, the temporary arrangement began to feel increasingly permanent. Hope thrived under the shared care of Madeline and Yates, growing plump and alert, her dark eyes taking in the world with apparent fascination. Madeline, too, blossomed in the security of the ranch. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long gradually receded, replaced by a cautious contentment. She expanded the garden, putting up preserves for the winter. She learned to ride Penny, accompanying Yates on shorter trips around the property, with Hope secured in a sling across her chest. For his part, Yates seemed to walk taller, laugh more freely. He built additions to the cabin, a proper bedroom for Madeline and Hope, a larger kitchen. He even hired 2 hands to help with the cattle, explaining to Madeline that it would allow him to spend more time at home. They settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly like family, though neither spoke of it directly. There were moments a lingering glance across the dinner table, fingers brushing as they passed the baby between them, that hinted at deeper feelings. But Yates maintained a respectful distance, never presuming, never pushing. It was Madeline who finally breached the unspoken boundary between them. One evening in late September, after Hope had been settled in her cradle for the night, she found Yates on the porch, smoking his pipe and watching the stars emerge. "May I join you?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the growing autumn chill. Yates stood immediately, offering her his chair. "Of course." "No, don't get up," Madeline said, settling onto the bench beside him instead. "It's a beautiful night." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the occasional soft snort from the horses in the corral. Finally, Madeline gathered her courage. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yates turned to her, his expression open. "Anything. Why did you really take me in that night? The truth, please." The question seemed to catch him off guard. He considered it for a long moment, tamping out his pipe and setting it aside. "When I found you," he began slowly, "you reminded me of someone, a woman I knew during the war. She was pregnant, alone. Her husband had been killed at Shiloh. I found her hiding in a barn while on patrol." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "I should have helped her, brought her to safety. But I was following orders, and she was on the wrong side, so I left her there." Madeline listened, barely breathing. 3 days later, we came back through that area," Yates continued. "She was dead, her and the baby both." His voice grew rough. "I've carried that with me ever since. When I found you that night, it felt like a second chance somehow." "Oh, Yates," Madeline breathed, her heart aching for him. "But that was only at first," he added quickly. "After that, after I knew you, it was different. It wasn't about making amends anymore. It was about you, Madeline." The way he said her name, like it was something precious, made her breath catch. Impulsively, she reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. "I've been afraid," she confessed. "Not just of Vernon, but of feeling again, of trusting. When I'm with you, though, I'm not afraid." Yates's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I would never hurt you, Madeline, not ever." "I know." And she did know, with a certainty that surprised her. "That's why I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the night air between them, brave and terrifying. For a moment, Yates was utterly still. Then, with infinite gentleness, he reached out and touched her cheek. "I fell in love with you weeks ago," he said simply. "But I didn't want to push. You've been through so much, and technically you're still married," and Madeline silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Yates responded, his hand sliding into her hair. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I don't know what the future holds," Madeline said softly, "but I want to face it with you. You and Hope together." Yates touched his forehead to hers. "That's all I want too." The moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Yates was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the revolver at his hip. Madeline stood too, fear coiling in her stomach. "Get inside," Yates ordered quietly. "Take Hope and hide in the root cellar. Don't come out until I call for you." Heart pounding, Madeline hurried into the cabin. She lifted the still sleeping Hope from her cradle, wrapping her securely in a blanket, then descended the ladder into the small cellar beneath the kitchen floor. Above, she could hear Yates moving about, presumably arming himself. The sound of hooves grew louder, then stopped. Male voices called out, though Madeline couldn't make out the words. She clutched Hope to her chest, praying the baby wouldn't wake and cry. Minutes stretched like hours as she crouched in the darkness, straining to hear what was happening above. There was conversation, then silence, then the sound of horses moving away. Still, Madeline didn't emerge, remembering Yates's instructions to wait for his call. When it finally came, his voice was tight with tension. "Madeline, it's safe now." She climbed awkwardly up the ladder, Hope secure in one arm. Yates stood in the center of the cabin, his face grim. "What is it?" Madeline asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "Who was that?" "Riders from town," Yates replied. "Looking for you." Madeline sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "They know I'm here?" "No, they were just checking all the homesteads in the area." Yates ran a hand over his face. But they showed me a new poster. Vernon's in Tucson now, leading the search himself. The news hit Madeline like a physical blow. He's here, in Arizona territory? Yates nodded grimly. Arrived last week, according to them. He's offering $1,000 for information about you. $1,000 was a fortune in the territory, more than enough to tempt even the most honorable of men. Madeline looked down at Hope, peacefully sleeping, despite the danger closing in around them. We have to leave, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Tonight. No, Yates said firmly. Running now would only make you more vulnerable. We need to face this head on. How? Madeline demanded. Vernon has money, influence. If he finds us, he'll take Hope. He might even kill you for interfering. Yates knelt before her, taking her free hand in both of his. Do you trust me, Madeline? She looked into his eyes, seeing the determination there. Yes, she whispered, with my life, with Hope's life. Then trust me now? I have a plan. The plan, as Yates outlined it, was both simple and desperate. They would ride to Tucson immediately, not to flee, but to confront Vernon directly. Yates had a friend there, a lawyer named Samuel Turner, who had once helped him with a land dispute. Turner is well respected in the territory, Yates explained as they hastily packed essentials for the journey. If we can get him to help us, we might be able to obtain a legal separation for you. With testimony about Vernon's plan to sell Hope, no judge would grant him custody. It was a gamble, and they both knew it, but the alternative, continuing to hide, always looking over their shoulders, was no longer tenable. They set out just before dawn, Hope bundled securely against Madeline's chest as they rode double on Sunny. Yates had left instructions with his ranch hands about caring for the place in his absence, though he'd been deliberately vague about their destination. The journey to Tucson took 3 days, with stops only when absolutely necessary for Hope's feedings or brief rest. They avoided main roads and towns, keeping to less traveled paths that Yates knew from his years in the territory. On the evening of the 3rd day, they crested a ridge to see Tucson spread below them, its buildings casting long shadows in the setting sun. Madeline's heart raced at the sight. Somewhere in that town was Vernon, the man who had once promised to love and protect her, now hunting her like prey. Are you ready for this? Yates asked, his voice close to her ear. Madeline tightened her hold on Hope. No, she admitted, but I'll do it anyway, for her. For all of us, Yates corrected gently. They made their way down into the town as twilight deepened into night, heading directly for the address Yates had for Samuel Turner. The lawyer lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, far enough from the main thoroughfare to offer some privacy. When Turner answered their knock, his initial surprise quickly gave way to concern as Yates briefly explained their situation. He ushered them inside, his wife immediately taking charge of providing food and a place for Hope to sleep. This is a serious matter, Turner said once they were settled at his kitchen table. Porter is a wealthy man with connections. He's been telling everyone his wife is mentally unstable, that she stole his child in a fit of delusion. It's not true, Madeline said firmly. I can prove what kind of man he really is. There are people in Silver Creek who know about his schemes, though most are too afraid to speak out. Turner nodded thoughtfully. Accusing him publicly will be dangerous, but if we can gather enough evidence, present it to Judge Wilson. He's a fair man, especially where children are concerned. They talked late into the night, formulating a strategy. Turner would file papers the next morning, requesting an emergency hearing before the judge. Madeline would provide a sworn statement about Vernon's abuse and his plan to sell Hope, and Yates would stand as witness to her condition when he found her and to her character in the month since. It won't be easy, Turner warned as they prepared to retire for the night. Madeline to the guest room with Hope, Yates to a pallet in the study. Porter will fight this with everything he has. So will we, Yates replied, his hand finding Madeline's and squeezing gently. The next morning, Turner left early for the courthouse, while Madeline and Yates remained hidden at his home. By mid-afternoon, he returned with news Judge Wilson had agreed to hear their case the following day. But there was other news as well, more troubling. Porter knows you're in town, Turner said grimly. Someone saw you riding in last night. He's offering $2,000 now for information on your whereabouts. Madeline paled, clutching Hope closer. How did he find out so quickly? Small towns have big ears, Turner replied. "My advice is to stay inside, away from windows. My wife will help you prepare for tomorrow." That night, sleep eluded Madeline despite her exhaustion. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, Hope sleeping peacefully beside her, and tried to imagine what the next day would bring. Would Vernon be there? Would she have to face him directly? The thought made her stomach churn with anxiety. A soft knock at the door roused her from these troubled thoughts. "Madeline," Yates's voice called softly. "Are you awake?" She rose carefully so as not to disturb Hope and opened the door. Yates stood in the hallway, his expression troubled. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Kept thinking about tomorrow." "Me too," Madeline whispered. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "Whatever happens, remember that you're not alone anymore. I'll be right beside you." The simple promise brought tears to Madeline's eyes. "I'm so afraid, Yates, not for myself, but for Hope, for you." "Don't be afraid for me," he said firmly. "I've faced worse odds." She believed him. There was a quiet strength to Yates Quinn that had nothing to do with physical prowess, though he possessed that too, and everything to do with an unshakable moral center. "There's something I need to tell you," Madeline said suddenly. "Something I should have said before." Yates waited, his eyes intent on hers. "If we get through this," she continued, "if the judge grants me a separation and custody of Hope, I want us to be a family, a real family, you, me, and Hope." A slow smile spread across Yates's face, transforming his serious features. "Are you proposing to me, Madeline Porter?" Despite everything, she found herself smiling back. "I suppose I am. Once I'm legally free, of course." Yates took her hands in his. "Then my answer is yes, 1,000 times yes." The courthouse was crowded the next morning, word having spread about the unusual case before Judge Wilson. Madeline kept her head high as she entered, Hope in her arms and Yates at her side. Turner led them to a table at the front of the room, where they sat with straight backs, ignoring the whispers that followed them. And then Vernon was there, striding in with his lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Madeline's breath caught at the sight of her husband. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a polished way, with cold eyes that belied his charming smile. Those eyes found her across the room, narrowing with a mixture of anger and triumph. Then his gaze shifted to Hope, and something possessive flashed in his expression that made Madeline instinctively hold her daughter tighter. Judge Wilson entered, a stern-faced man with silver hair and piercing eyes. The proceedings began formally, with Turner presenting their petition for separation and sole custody. Vernon's lawyer countered with accusations of Madeline's mental instability and unfitness as a mother. When it was Madeline's turn to speak, she rose on shaky legs, passing Hope to Yates. Standing before the judge, she told her story, all of it. The abuse, the discovery of Vernon's schemes, his plan to sell their unborn child. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by the need to protect her daughter and the knowledge that Yates was behind her, supporting her. Vernon's face darkened with each word, his hands clenching into fists on the table before him. When he was called to testify, he presented a very different version of events, painting himself as a concerned husband and father, desperate to find his disturbed wife and protect his child. "She was irrational throughout her pregnancy, Your Honor," Vernon said smoothly, "imagining conspiracies, accusing me of terrible things. I only want what's best for my wife and daughter." "And what about the couple in Boston?" Turner asked during cross-examination. "The Whitefields? Did you or did you not accept payment from them in exchange for your unborn child?" Vernon's composure slipped just for a moment. "That's absurd," he snapped. "A complete fabrication." "Is it?" Turner produced a telegram. "This is a message from Theodore Whitefield to you, dated March 12th of this year. It refers to a financial agreement regarding the child and confirms a transfer of funds to your account at First National Bank in Silver Creek." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Vernon's lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear. "That was a business transaction unrelated to my child," Vernon insisted, but the damage was done. Judge Wilson's expression had hardened, his gaze assessing as it moved between Vernon and Madeline. Yates testified next, describing how he had found Madeline that night in the desert, exhausted, terrified, and alone. He spoke of her courage in the month since, her devotion to hope, the life they had built together on his ranch. When asked about his relationship with Madeline, Yates was forthright. "I love her, Your Honor, and I love Hope as if she were my own. I want to marry Madeline, legally and properly, as soon as she's free to do so." The judge considered this, his expression unreadable. "And you, Mrs. Porter? Do you return these feelings?" Madeline met his gaze steadily. "I do, Your Honor. Mr. Quinn has shown me what a real man, a good man, is like. He has never raised his hand to me, never threatened or belittled me. He has protected us both without trying to own us." Vernon surged to his feet. "This is outrageous! She's admitting to adultery?" "Sit down, Mr. Porter," Judge Wilson snapped. "Mrs. Porter has made no such admission, and I will not have outbursts in my courtroom." The hearing continued for hours, with witnesses from Silver Creek testifying to Vernon's character and business practices. By the time the judge called for a recess to consider his ruling, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the courthouse windows. Madeline sat in a small antechamber, nursing Hope while Yates kept watch at the door. Her future, their future, hung in the balance of one man's judgment. If the judge ruled against her, Vernon could take Hope. The thought was unbearable. "He's a fair man," Turner reassured them, joining them in the room. "And we presented a strong case. I'm cautiously optimistic." When they were called back into the courtroom, Madeline felt as if she were walking to her own execution. Her legs seemed weighted with lead, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Judge Wilson sat at the bench, his expression grave as he surveyed the room. When silence fell, he cleared his throat. "This is a troubling case," he began. "One that raises significant questions about the nature of marriage and parenthood. I have heard testimony that paints two very different pictures of the situation." He turned his gaze directly to Vernon. "Mr. Porter, your reputation in Silver Creek precedes you. I have received statements from multiple citizens regarding your business dealings, none of them flattering. More concerning are the allegations regarding your treatment of your wife and your apparent willingness to treat your child as a commodity." Vernon started to protest, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him. "Mrs. Porter," he continued, turning to Madeline, "your actions in fleeing with your unborn child were desperate ones. However, given the circumstances as presented, I cannot fault your maternal instinct to protect your child." Madeline held her breath, hardly daring to hope. "It is the judgment of this court," Judge Wilson declared, "that Mary Madeline Porter shall be granted a legal separation from Vernon Porter, with full custody of the minor child, Hope Porter. Mr. Porter shall have no visitation rights and is hereby ordered to pay monthly support for the child's maintenance." Relief washed over Madeline in a dizzying wave. She reached blindly for Yates's hand, finding it already extended toward her. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, given the serious nature of the allegations regarding Mr. Porter's business practices, I am referring this matter to the Territorial Prosecutor for investigation. Mr. Porter, you will remain in Tucson and make yourself available to the authorities." Vernon's face contorted with rage. "This is a travesty," he spat. "She's turned you against me with her lies." "That's enough," Judge Wilson said sharply. "One more outburst and I'll have you held in contempt. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell with a decisive crack, and it was over. Madeline was free not completely, for a full divorce would require additional proceedings, but free enough. Hope was hers, legally and irrefutably. Vernon stormed from the courtroom, his lawyer hurrying after him. Madeline watched him go, a strange mixture of relief and lingering fear coursing through her. It seemed impossible that after all this time, all the terror and running, it could end so simply. "It's over," Yates said softly, his arm coming around her shoulders. "He can't hurt you anymore." Madeline looked up at him, this man who had changed her life so completely. "Take us home," she whispered. The journey back to the ranch was lighter, easier, despite the physical discomfort of long days in the saddle. They took their time, stopping in small towns along the way, no longer hiding their faces or their connection. In each place, Yates introduced Madeline and Hope with undisguised pride, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. When they finally crested the ridge that overlooked the ranch, Madeline felt a surge of emotion so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. Below them lay not just a collection of buildings and land, but home, in the truest sense, a place where she had found safety, purpose, and love. "Welcome home," Yates said, echoing her thoughts. The ranch hands had maintained everything perfectly in their absence. The cattle were healthy, the garden tended, the cabin clean and welcoming. That night, after Hope was settled in her cradle, Madeline and Yates sat before the fire, their fingers intertwined. "What happens now?" Madeline asked, watching the play of firelight across his features. Yates smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. "Now we live, Madeline. We build our life together, day by day. When your divorce is final, we'll marry, if that's still what you want." "It is," she assured him, "more than anything." "And until then?" he asked. Madeline leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "Until then, we'll be what we already are, a family." Spring came to the high desert in a riot of wildflowers and new life. Hope took her first steps across the cabin floor, falling into Yates's waiting arms with peals of delighted laughter. The ranch prospered under their combined care, the herd growing, the garden expanding. Word came from Tucson that Vernon had fled the territory rather than face prosecution, last seen boarding a steamer bound for South America. The news brought Madeline a final sense of closure, the last chain binding her to her past, broken at last. On a perfect May morning, with Hope toddling beside her and flowers woven into her hair, Madeline walked toward Yates beneath an arch of twisted juniper branches. The territorial judge who had granted her divorce 2 months prior now stood ready to join them in marriage, witnessed by friends they had made in the surrounding homesteads. As she reached Yates, he took her hands in his eyes filled with a love so pure it took her breath away. "I never expected to find you," he said softly, meant for her ears alone. "That night in the desert, when I heard you weeping, I was just trying to do the right thing. I didn't know you would become my whole world." Madeline smiled through happy tears. "And I was just trying to survive. I didn't know I would find my home." They spoke their vows beneath the open sky, Hope babbling happily in the arms of a neighbor. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Yates gathered Madeline close, his kiss a promise of all the years to come. That night, as moonlight spilled through the window of their cabin, expanded now to a proper home, Madeline watched Hope sleeping peacefully in her new bed. Yates came to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Madeline turned in his embrace, lifting her face to his. "More than I ever dreamed possible." Beyond the window, the vast Arizona sky stretched endlessly above their ranch, their home. Stars glittered like scattered diamonds, the same stars that had witnessed Madeline's tears that fateful night almost a year ago. But now, instead of fear and desperation, they shone down on hope and love and the promise of tomorrow. And in the quiet sanctuary of their home, surrounded by the life they had built together, Madeline and Yates Quinn held each other close, knowing that whatever the future might bring, they would face it together as a family.